In the past century, the world saw laws enacted to delegitimize ideologies of hatred, such as Nazism, fascism. In the current time, in the present day, right-thinking minds in different parts of the world, after witnessing the dangers of another ideology of hatred, Zionism, are making similar efforts, although with much greater difficulty, to abolish, to pass legislation in different parts of the world, to abolish Zionism. These are ideologies of hatred, apartheid, and discrimination, racism. Of course, trying to abolish Zionism is proving to be more difficult because it has managed to spread its tentacles in many parts of the world, especially in the West, where governments and institutions are controlled by Zionist forces. Take the United States, for instance. Even laws, domestic laws in that country, cannot be enacted without the approval of Zionist institutions. It is not just the foreign policy of the United States which is being controlled by Zionist forces, but also domestic policies in such a way that benefits for Americans themselves domestically are held hostage by Zionist forces who want to have something given in return to the Zionist occupation in Palestine in order to allow its representatives in the United States Congress vote to approve benefits that are aimed at benefit the American citizens. To that extent, the tentacles of Zionism have spread in the United States, and today there are many voices coming up to try to pass legislation that will ultimately abolish that ideology of war, of hatred, the ideology of apartheid, a similar ideology, although not as destructive and not as expansive as Zionism is, was, and continues to be. A similar ideology in South Africa was brought to an end when the state of apartheid that ruled that nation. But there is another ideology, perhaps equally or even more dangerous, and you might be shocked, surprised, or even, and I think shocked when I say this. I don't call it democracy, I call it democracy. And the reason I call it democracy, because in essence it tries to portray and pass itself as a democracy, when in fact it is doing the exact opposite. Particularly in nations where this is practiced, look at the leaders that it has put in power and how dangerous they have been. Let us not forget that Hitler got to power through a process of what is called democracy, or as I call it, democracy. So did Mussolini. So did the American president who ordered 2 atomic bombs to be dropped on civilian populations. So did the current president of the United States, Donald Trump. He is a product of the same political process. George Baby Bush and the disasters he caused out of the war in Iraq was a product of democracy. And we can go on and on. There has to be a system. I don't know what that system is, and it needs to be thought about deeply. I'm not saying that the other one, which does not portray itself as a democracy and does not have the political process of going and putting a ticket in the voting booth, I don't say that system is better, because it has also, or what is known as dictatorship. I'm not saying that is a better one, because it has produced its fair share, more than its fair share, of political leaders who have caused disaster in humanity. But there is an argument that says democracy is not perfect, but it is the best that we have. No, that claim is continuously being proven to be false. Democracy is not the best that we have. We can have better. Right-thinking people need to sit down and think about it. And the democracy, the way that is practiced today, which I call democracy, needs to be abolished, because it is as dangerous as the other ideologies: Zionism, Nazism, fascism. And perhaps in some cases it is even more dangerous, because democracy or democracy passes itself as a legitimate way of life that should be adopted by nations all over the world. And as it is being adopted by nations all over the world, it keeps on producing dangerous leaders, mentally insane leaders. Look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a certified, dangerous, insane person. He is a mentally disturbed person, and he's a product of democracy. Adolf Hitler was a mentally disturbed person, and he was a product of democracy. George Bush was controlled by a group of people who can arguably be called ideologically insane, and he was also a product of democracy. A political process that repeatedly produces such leaders needs to be examined very carefully. Even as we are working, and we must continue working, on trying to end the control of ideologies such as Zionism, which has produced war criminals such as Benjamin Netanyahu and his predecessors, and the people around him in his current group of those who rule Palestine today. Even as Zionism, which has produced such disasters, and even as we make the effort to end and abolish this dangerous ideology, we must take a very close look at what this so-called system called democracy, or as I keep on repeating, it is in fact democracy. We need to examine it very closely and decide whether it should be allowed to continue. People, right-thinking people, need to sit together and determine how we can change it, improve it, and make it work in a way that produces leaders who are responsible, who are mentally sane and not mentally disturbed. There has to be checks and balances. We cannot continue to allow a political process that everybody is encouraged to sign on, even as it continues to expand a kind of leadership that proves repeatedly to be dangerous to world peace. Today, we have one of the worst examples of such a system. not controlling just any authority, but controlling one of the most powerful authorities in the world, one of the world powers. Think about that. We are all satisfied that the alternative, dictatorship, is not the way forward. And many of us are continuing to be satisfied that it was the right decision to abolish Nazism and fascism. And the growing efforts today to abolish the descendants of Nazism, Zionism, this effort must continue and must be expanded. But we must also take a close look at what this system that is being sold to us as democracy, as an electoral political system that chooses the best when in fact it produces the worst of the society. 300 million people, more than 300 million people, is the population of the United States. The majority of those who went to vote voted for Donald Trump. That should tell you something of how this political process has been manipulated to produce such results. There are no checks and balances, it seems. And the world is coming closer and closer to disasters, to growing disasters, whether through war, through economies, through climate, through hunger, because of a very bad leadership in the world. Just like dictatorship produces terrible leadership, so does democracy. We don't have democracy. Whatever that means, you don't have it. What you have is democracy. And we need to sit down and think carefully whether we should allow this system to continue as is, or there needs to be a very serious look at it so that the next generations in this world are saved from the dangers of future leaders such as Hitler, George Bush, Donald Trump, Netanyahu, and many others who are the product of what is known as democracy, when in fact it is democracy. Thank you.